Chair and comrades, the xenophobia that is sweeping across the country at the moment must have come as a deep shock, particularly to comrades who for decades have, in the CWI, together with hundreds of thousands worldwide, supported the struggle against white minority rule, against apartheid, in support of the national liberation of the black working class. And to see a struggle that relied on international solidarity, including especially on the African continent, including the neighboring countries from where many of what are now referred to as foreign nationals are coming from. Countries, by the way, that suffered not only the economic consequences of their support for the liberation struggle, that in some instances hosted bases for the political and armed struggle in South Africa, like Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and so forth, that they now have come under attack. It fills one with revulsion. And if comrades internationally and activists more broadly are appalled by this, that's perfectly understandable. And we have a duty as the Marxist Workers Party to refrain from merely limiting ourselves to a condemnation, necessary as that is, particularly because of the barbarism that xenophobia, particularly in the past, has been associated with. This xenophobia has been simmering in the country for a while, particularly in the 2000s, as the full impact of the neoliberal policies of the ANC government imposed on the country, known as the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Policy, began to be felt, and reached its most barbaric levels in 2008, when pogroms were carried out, targeted at foreign nationals, that claimed the lives of 63 people, 21 of them South African, by the way, and it's a point I will return to in a minute. And similarly, in 2019, I think, where out of 12 people that had been killed, 10 were South Africa. We have a duty not only to explain why this is happening, but also to propose a way forward. And one has to start with the consequences of the capitalist policies which the ANC has been pursuing since it imposed neoliberalism in 1996. A policy, by the way, that was imposed in reality by a small grouping within the ANC cabinet around Thabo Mbeki, with the full support of Nelson Mandela, by the way, without any consultation, even in their own structures of the ANC National Executive Committee, and the full consequences of which we are seeing today. The World Bank has classified South Africa as the most unequal society on the planet. We have mass unemployment, which has just reached 13 million, which is about 43%. We have inequalities captured in the World Inequality Report with the following breathtaking statistic, that the top 10% of the population in this country owns 84% of the wealth in income and assets, whereas the income of the bottom 50% is negative. In addition to that, other examples of this inequality. At the time of the uprising of the mine workers in 2012, on the Platinum Belt in the Northwest Province around Rustenburg, the levels of inequality are shown by the disparities in income from management at the top and workers from below. For a rock drill operator to match the income of the CEO, the annual income, a rock drill operator would have had to work 197 years. Another more recent statistic is what is happening in the retail industry in a retail giant known as Checkers, where it has been reported that the lowest paid worker at Checkers would have to work for 290 years to earn what its CEO earned in 1 month. The level of poverty now engulfs nearly 2/3 of the population below the poverty line. In the first quarter alone of this year, Statistics South Africa reports that there has been a loss of 350,000 jobs, 70% of them young people. These are the conditions that have bred the phenomenon of xenophobia. There is a deep and bitter resentment within the mass of the population towards the political elite. And the forces behind the xenophobic campaign represent political formations that partly emanate from the factional struggle that have taken place in the ANC over years, like, for example, Zuma, who has created a party known as Umkhonto weSizwe, in an attempt to claim that he represents the true traditions of the ANC. This is an individual who's currently facing corruption charges from the first major corruption scandal around the arms deal in the 1990s, and who has been fighting a Stalingrad type battle to evade the charges. It's unsuccessful, so he's going to appear in court. And the xenophobic wave currently breaking out is a useful distraction for him and the forces around him from the fact that he will be appearing in court. The last time, however, this happened, when he refused to testify before the Commission of Inquiry into corruption within the state, he was charged with contempt and jailed, and the forces around him organized riots in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, which claimed over 350 lives at the time. A campaign that was dressed up as a battle against the elite and so-called white monopoly capital. And similar language is now being used by the same forces that are behind this campaign. And along with xenophobia has come inevitably, really, and predictably, a rise in racism. because, to use the words of one of the leading SACP members in government, Gwede Mantashe, the Minerals and Energy Minister, South Africa is an Irish coffee society, black at the bottom, white at the top with a few sprinklings of chocolate. And the resentment that is felt is for the ordinary person taken in by this message. Not so much the color of capital, although the language that is being used is white monopoly capital, but a sense of betrayal by those that have been able to elevate themselves into the top echelons of society. And even from their standpoint, by the way, they fail their own class interests, and that explains the factional bitterness within the black elite, expressed in the main between the battle between Zuma and the rest of the ANC. There is only one fully black-owned company, after more than 30 years, listed in the top 100 of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, that doesn't give you a full picture of what is a new phenomenon, that the inequalities in South Africa between blacks today is greater than it was under apartheid between white and black. That is the new division. And therefore, there's a resentment towards this elite. And it is part of the reason why there's a reaction about being lectured about human rights, about the Constitution, etc., when what people are preoccupied with is the searing poverty and destitution in which the majority find themselves after all these years. The economic conditions, of course, have found expression on the political plane. Xenophobia is one of them. Racism is another. And tribalism has followed suit. Even ideas that would have been considered anathema in the struggle against apartheid, where the attempt on the part of the apartheid regime to balkanize the country into Bantustans and so forth, was resisted with the unanimous idea that we are fighting for a unified country. And now we have talk of secession in the Western Cape, even within the Zulu royal family. That Zuma is courting for support so assiduously. There is a British immigrant based in the Western Cape who has appealed to Trump to support the case for an independent Western Cape. Trump, of course, has supported this by deliberately and falsely depicting the position of white Afrikaner farmers as one of genocide, and has apparently recently raised the limits of the number of whites that may seek refuge in the US. And all of these are playing a role in legitimizing this campaign, along with the fact, of course, that it is by no means a phenomenon that is limited to South Africa itself. So, in addition to explaining what is producing this reaction, we have a duty also to put forward solutions, how to campaign against it. And we have to face the reality that though there is a deep crisis of political representation on the part of the ruling class, expressed by the outcome of the 2024 elections, where the ANC lost its majority for the first time since 1994, where even the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, lost votes, that there is a huge gulf on the left of the political spectrum. The working class does not have its own political party. And that is why amongst sections even of the working class, the more desperate, the more marginalized, the idea that we are fighting against the elite the elite in the way in which the xenophobic orchestrators are couching their campaign has some resonance. I think it is also important to understand that it is not just the political parties like the ANC and the DA that have stepped up the xenophobic rhetoric and the talk about immigrants taking jobs and responsible for crime. Big business, the capitalist class, has funded formations that are in the forefront of the xenophobic campaign. The first of these was a formation known as Operation Dudula. He is Operation Dudula's first and founding leader, by the name of Nhlanhla Lux, is a protege of the Oppenheimer family that has historically been the wealthiest of the capitalist families in this country for more than a century. He has proudly posted pictures of himself posing next to a butterfly-winged Porsche and with the leading members of the Oppenheimer family. One of the other big organizations, Action SA, is also funded. It's led by the former chairperson of the Free Market Foundation of South Africa, a libertarian, right-wing, racist, and xenophobic character who made his money under apartheid, incidentally. So the capitalist class has, without a doubt, has a hand in these developments. Now, I think that the responsibility of Marxists is to build on the campaign that we have always been in the forefront of as the Marxist Workers Party, a campaign for a mass workers' party that must be based on the mobilization of the working class in what we describe as the three main theaters of struggle. The communities who suffered the consequences of a collapse of service delivery, electricity, water cuts, corruption, and so forth. Because there are protests taking place virtually every second day against this. But these struggles are taking place in isolation from each other. And we campaigned successfully when the new trade union federation, the South African Federation of Trade Unions, was launched in 2017, to persuade that conference to take responsibility for the creation of a mass workers' party, an idea, incidentally, that has always been part of the consciousness, but has been pushed to the back by a leadership in the trade union movement that has been absorbed into the ruling elite. And that resolution led to the convening of a working class summit in 2018 that adopted a declaration to form a mass workers' party and a socialist program. There is no more urgent time for the implementation of that declaration than now. We are calling for the formation of a united socialist civic federation, a Marxist youth and student movement, and a socialist confederation of trade unions. We have to do so all the more urgently. I'll conclude on this point. As a result of the fact that the political crisis facing the ANC and its whole tripartite alliance with the South African Communist Party and the Congress of South African Trade Unions has found new expression by a Congress that is of the left, so-called, by the South African Communist Party, to which all these unsavory, corrupt characters like Zuma, his daughter, leader of the so-called March on March campaign, have been invited. Even those that the ANC was obliged to kick out have found a home under the banner of this attempt by the SACP to cut across the unification of the working class, the best promise of which would be through the implementation of the declaration that was adopted at the SAFTU Congress, the SAFTU Working Class Summit in 2018. The last point I will make, comrades, is that one of the symptoms of the crisis so far as the trade union movement is concerned that contributes towards the vacuum is that what was taken for granted in the past about international links has not been seriously followed through. And we need to reach out to the trade unions in the immediate Southern African subcontinent, but also on the continent as a whole, to mount a joint campaign against the elites in both countries who, whatever posturing they are engaged in, are doing nothing to address the fundamental problem that causes migration in the first place, and are in fact colluding in exploiting the resources, for example, in the DRC, with the catastrophe that has resulted in mass internal displacement and into neighboring countries as a consequence of the war. And we have to call for Pan-Africanism, but based on the interests of the working class and on a socialist program, and link up with the rest of the world working class to address the question in exactly the same way, because the phenomenon is a problem for the working class also in the advanced capitalist countries. I'll conclude on that point, Comrade Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrades, and good afternoon to all the comrades participating in this important discussion. And I want to thank Comrade Weizmann for his introduction, which we can say has given us a kind of political and economic background to the crisis we are facing, aspect of which I will also still reiterate in my intervention. But just to stress that as Marxists, these developments remind us of the declaration a long time ago by one of the founding fathers of Marxism, Leon Trotsky, that the choice that faced humanity and that still faces humanity is either socialism or barbarism. And so whether by way of xenophobia or by way of the various wars we're witnessing in different parts of the world, it's a graphic confirmation that ultimately, without the decisive intervention of the working class, and the working class coming into power on a program of socialism and Marxism, we'll be confronted with all this kind of phenomenon. But that is not to say that we do not have a duty to intervene and help to change the pattern of discourse as far as this is concerned. I also think that an important background to this crisis should also be the fact that globally we are witnessing the rise of right-wing, political parties, and we could see this in the emergence of Trump in America and some other extreme, not just right, but extreme right governments in parts of Europe. And the implication of this is that we have an anti-immigration or anti-migration, rhetoric pervading, through these political developments, such that we're witnessing what Trump's state police, called ICE or whatever, is doing in America. And increasingly, we're also seeing this in Europe. Of course, this matters a lot to us here in Nigeria because whether you are talking of America or you are talking of Europe, you have, thousands, if not millions of Nigerians spread, across the world, of course, including, South Africa as well. So I think this right-wing development is also an important, background to the kind of thing, that is happening. Because one way or the other, developments in different parts of the world have effects even on local population. So it cannot be ruled out that those South African youths carrying out these attacks are also drawing inspiration from these places where even in advanced capitalist countries, they're saying the migrants are the ones, causing their problem. And so they look at their own environment too and tend, to draw this kind of, conclusion, which of course is a very, false one. But coming to South Africa itself, and I think Comrade Weizmann has put the issues very sharply, the failure fundamentally of the ANC, government, its pro-imperialist and neoliberal, character, and the fact that in a way, the current government of Ravzamov, kind of sees this as a kind of way out, but ultimately they would also have to answer questions, for their failure. And like he said, it's quite instructive that in South Africa, you have a huge, crisis of joblessness, particularly youth unemployment. And if you look at the data carefully, so because in general terms, we might say, oh, there's youth unemployment, but as at 2025, some of the statistics about unemployment in South Africa point to the fact that 62.4% of the employed are young people between the ages of 15 and 24, which for me, speaks to the nature and character, of this crisis. Now, if you look at that age bracket, definitely it's an age bracket that, except if they are politically inclined or they are, members of, working class movement or maybe our own kind of organization, would virtually know nothing about the struggle, against apartheid, except perhaps what they have come across in literature, which may even sound, remote as we speak today. So whenever people here in Nigeria talk about the fact that, oh, look at these people, they didn't realize what we did for them, we supported apartheid struggle and all those kind of things, it's like music to their ears because it's not part of, the history they have, grown up with. And I believe that the ruling class in South Africa is very conscious of this. And I doubt if ANC, as a government, as a matter of its own policy, have ever even embarked on a kind of mass education as to how South Africa arrived at its current, destination. So there's no doubt about it that, Comrade Weizmann is right that, these xenophobic attacks are products of, the failure fundamentally of the ANC, government. And we see all these kind of things happening all over, the places. Of course, it is expected that the images, the pictures that are coming out of South Africa would enrage the black population in other places, including here, here in Nigeria, where there has been a lot of, angry reactions. Some of them very, very opportunistic. And Comrade Pelad referenced that in his introduction. How, for example, in the Nigerian parliament, the one we call the Senate, that is the upper chamber, you had politicians, including a former leader of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Oshiomhole, waxing lyrical and saying that our government should take action against MTN, should do all these. And that is, of course, he tried to make the point that the president of South Africa, Cyril, has shares in MTN and things like that. But that was just a kind of, false, a narrative in terms of the actions that needed, to be taken. But the truth is that the ordinary people here in Nigeria expect government to take one action or the other. And some of them are already referencing Ghana. Ghana has, been proactive. They've gone to rescue their citizens. What exactly is the Nigerian, government doing? So we have this kind of situation, confronting us here, and we cannot be dismissive of this mood of anger or of the fact that people are genuinely concerned that, these attacks are being perpetrated, and it seems as if our government, is doing nothing. But as Marxists and socialists, our duty is also to explain the basis, of this. It's not as if these people just dropped from the sky and started hating the blacks just like that. After all, we don't have, this kind of xenophobic attacks, in the past. You may have elements of it, but our ability to explain the political and economic roots of this, will go a long way. And in that regard, I do recall that in one of our discussions here, I'd also made reference to the fact that talking of blaming, foreigners for economic woes is really not a new phenomenon in Africa, certainly not in Nigeria, where between 1979 and 1983, we also saw the failure of, a civilian government, or if you like, so-called democratic government, that at the height of its economic, failure, and in fact, the imposition of austerity measures on the citizens. And this was a period when, incidentally, we were in the university and we were in the, students' movement. That regime, it's called the Shehu Shagari regime, started blaming foreigners, particularly Ghanaians, for the economic woes of Nigerians. And it was the same pattern. Perhaps the difference between that time and now in South Africa is that the South African government has not openly come out to say that it is these foreigners that are responsible, but it happened here in Nigeria, where the Shehu Shagari government actually blamed foreigners for taking the jobs that Nigerians would have done. They talked about what we normally call menial or menial jobs here, that is all these artisans, shoemakers, and so on and so forth. But as at that time here in Nigeria too, we had Ghanaians and other foreigners who were teachers in our universities, who were teachers in our secondary schools. In fact, for my generation, I do not think anybody of my age group that went to secondary school between 1973 and maybe 1978 and 1980 that didn't have one Ghanaian teacher or the other, either teaching English or mathematics. The same thing, we had Indians, we had Pakistanis, we had Bangladeshi, which in itself was a reflection of the relative boom in the Nigerian economy, incidentally under the military, even before the civilian. So we talk of oil boom at a time, and you saw the Nigerian economy, thriving. And not just in the academic sector that you had foreigners working as expatriates, you even had them in the hospitals, foreign doctors, and so on and so forth. But following the collapse of the economy, the imposition of austerity measures, and the rising anger among the people, including the students in the universities, it was convenient for the Shagari regime to blame Ghanaians, and there was mass deportation of Ghanaians, from Nigeria. We have also seen this development, incidentally, in the same Ghana. Now, although not in the same proportion as South Africa, we have seen, a rising anger of Ghanaians against Nigerians in a kind of, reverse history, where Ghanaians are equally blaming Nigerians, for taking over, their economy, for taking over their jobs, and there had been some forms of attacks on Nigerians, even in Ghana. So we need to make that point decisively, that at the end of the day, the failure of these governments, the failure of neoliberal, policies, the failure of policies like, privatization, policies like commercialization of education, commercialization of healthcare, which we see across all these countries in different forms, be it in Nigeria, be it in Ghana, be it in South Africa, would ultimately create this kind of scenario where you are likely to have, the growth of right-wing elements leading, xenophobic, movements. But back to South Africa, I also think that it's important to make the point in a discussion like this that at the end of the day, the government itself is living on borrowed time. If you look at what has happened in the past 48 hours, for example, the anti-foreigners movement has gone from, okay, well, there's an ultimatum, they should leave by a certain date, but now you're having lootings, you're having people invading shops, ostensibly because they belong to foreigners. But what you see in this is how, again, poverty, hunger is driving, all this. And it just occurred to me that, okay, by the time they destroy all these so-called foreign businesses, loot the shops, or by the time they have looted as much as they could, they're not going to live on all these things forever. And ultimately, they will come to that realization that there is a problem. The problem of hunger will still remain. The problem of unemployment will still remain. And I think that at a certain point, this anger, when the foreigners, are hypothetically speaking, are no longer there, they're likely to ask fundamental questions of their government. And this is where the role of our organization becomes very, very important in terms of preparing for this, turn, or let me say, likely, turn of events when, the citizens would begin to confront their government directly, because that so-called enemy is no longer there, and that reinforces the importance of arming ourselves, politically, and developing sets of, demands that would, correspond to that. So for me, it's like there's a time bomb still waiting to explode. It has exploded now in the form of xenophobia, but we could even have worst scenario of riots, of, struggles that are directionless, but we would need the intervention of our forces in a place like, South Africa. Well, as I conclude in this, my own initial intervention, I also think that much as these, xenophobic attacks are really, really kind of, demoralizing, especially from our own point of view of our organization of an international trying to build working class solidarity across Africa, Europe, and America, because ultimately these kind of attacks are capable of undermining our efforts. Because here too, you have people feeling that, well, we need to hit back. We need to deport South Africans. We need to do all that. But amidst all this, really, I think perhaps there's also some glimmer of hope that we can use this opportunity to build a kind of, what you might call, a Pan-African, consciousness around the various issues we have identified as undermining our development, and finding a way of letting particularly the younger generation know that really this is the major cause of this problem, and the way out lies in building, working class solidarity and fighting against. Okay, I'm rounding up now. Fighting against, neoliberal policies in our society, and in that regard, I was quite encouraged when I came in this afternoon for, just to have an environment for this program. In my office, I saw a group of young, Nigerians, very young ones, having a kind of, seminar or symposium in the conference room of my organization. And I was curious and I asked them, what are you discussing? They said, well, they are discussing problems of African youth. And naturally, I said, oh, maybe you are discussing xenophobia. No, they said, no, they are discussing Afrophobia. And I said, what do you mean by Afrophobia? They said, well, they're just looking at the fact that Africans seems to be facing problems in Europe and so on. So which means that even among the young people, they're looking for a way out. They're having this kind of discussions. And that is why I would recommend, in addition to the recommendations that Comrade Weizmann has made, that we need to do more of, public activities. I know that our forces here in Nigeria and South Africa are small, but I'm glad that we still have comrades in trade unions. They may be few. We need to use these platforms. We need to use the platforms of the students' movement, wherever we have the influence, to organize, symposiums, lectures, and discussions around this topical issue of xenophobia, because it allows us to explain, our perspectives. It allows us, to win people to our side, and it allows us to build a consciousness where we have more elements capable of intervening and understanding that ultimately the task before us is that of, the unity of the working class across our respective countries, across our continent, towards, defeating the forces of neoliberalism and capitalism. Thank you very much.